Yeah, I nearly didn't upload a video this month. I was obviously quite late to this. And now that I am uploading something, it's not part 2 of the tutorial. That is still in the works, it's just of course it's not ready. But this time I decided I must get something out, and I realised that at some point I would plan to do a video on my scrap projects anyway. And now seems like a fitting time to talk about why I go so long without really posting anything. Of course, I post a lot more frequently on Double Chin Do 7, my second more casual sort of gaming channel. But in terms of this high-effort content over here, of course the posts are a lot less frequent. And as I say, I'm trying to make it monthly uploads, and I really thought I could handle that. But I end up getting too busy, and then realising, oh god, I only have this much time to do this now. I mean, when was the last full-length track I made? Synesthesia? Oh Jesus, how long ago? Oh my god, it was that long ago. And I never even uploaded it to YouTube, and well, anyway, part of the reason why it's been that long since I've made a proper dubstep track is, well, for one, obviously I haven't been doing nothing. I've been working on the soundtrack for Null and Void quite a lot. Those tracks individually don't take as much effort, however obviously there's a lot more of them to do. But as well as that, when I've been trying to make another full-on dubstep track, I have especially recently gotten stuck with the problem of having loads of ideas that I feel are too good to dump and yet not good enough to finish, or I'm just completely stumped on what to do with them next. And as much as I would love to fully flesh these all out into full-length tracks, I know for a fact at the very least like 3/4 of these are getting scrapped. So no sense in just letting them disappear themselves. To save them from non-existence, I'm going to show them here. Before we start, quick disclaimer ahead of time. Of course, being unfinished, a lot of these tracks are going to have weird bits in them. Some of them are going to have sounds that clearly don't fit. Some of them are suddenly going to go to sounds with no mastering. Some of them are just going to have some weird progressions or just cuts to drops in the middle of a, melody. That is all just because, this is unfinished stuff. That's obviously not how it's intended to be if I ever finished it. But hopefully you'll enjoy what is on show here. I'll quickly start with a bit of an old one, and this isn't so much a project that I've been working on that has been left unfinished. It's more something that I still want to return to, despite having returned to it before. Essentially, ages ago, I had the idea of making a dubstep track called GG, especially because dubstep is so synonymous with the whole, old MLG meme style stuff. Not that it would be a meme track necessarily, but it would be very video game-y themed and just straight up dubstep. And when trying to make a melody for that, I kind of just stumbled across something that I absolutely love. To me at least, this is one of the catchiest melodies I've made, and I really like it. But then I didn't know how to make a drop for it at the time, because this melody was first made by me years ago, and I was not a very good producer at the time. And then that project crashed, and this is before I could save, so I lost it. And then I decided I would revisit it, not actually that long after I lost it, and remade it from the ground up. And that was an improvement. However, my mastering at the time was absolutely awful. I had only just recently discovered turning off the limiter on the master, and I was having trouble finding the sweet spot between where it gets too distorted and when it becomes too flat if you just have the limiter on. And so I really like the idea of going back to remake this again, just because I still feel like I haven't done this really nice melody justice. Though it's definitely not high up on my list of priorities, at the end of the day, as much as I would love to do something with this, I know it's not really that important compared to some of my other projects that probably are more likely to get finished. So for now, I suppose I'm just going to leave this as this catchy little loop. Another one that's a little bit old, I'm starting with the older ones here, although I don't remember the exact date that I started working on all of these, I'm generally going to try and go in chronological order. This one is called Chamber, and essentially the idea was, I always liked the idea of trying to make some kind of hybrid classical orchestra mixed with dubstep, and there is a kind of, well, I don't think it'd be a subgenre, but something like that to classical music called chamber music. And one of the issues I thought with the idea of combining orchestral music and dubstep is that orchestral music, you don't see so many repeating motifs and melodies because there wasn't that much variation you could have with the timbre of the sound. Whereas now, obviously, with electronic music, there's such a massive variety of different timbres that are possible that the melodies often get repeated a lot more. Conveniently, though, chamber music is basically old kind of classical music, except it's called chamber music because it's not meant for a big, orchestra symphony. It's made for a chamber or a room just for a few people to dance in, and so as a result, it's usually a little bit more catchy and repetitive. And just in general, I didn't think chamber sounded like a bad title for a dubstep track, so I like the idea of trying to make this chamber music, dubstep music hybrid. At the same time, I also wanted to learn a bit more about music theory, so I made this very shortly after watching a series of YouTube videos by a music professor about music theory, and this is me basically trying to apply what I learned. So as a result, even though there's still some sort of repetition, there's a bit less repetition in this track, and there's a bit more key changing going on. I'm trying to make it as smooth as possible as well if I can. To be honest though, it's been a long time since I've touched this one. I like the idea, I just feel like I'm going to struggle to execute it. And it's not something I'd want to work on until I really felt confident and like I had the time for if things don't go well, that I can put in the effort to push through it, and I don't feel like I have that time at the moment. And I've already started other projects now, and some of those other ones are looking a bit more promising. One last note is that the drop here is a placeholder. That's not to say these basses are going to be scrapped, they're probably going to be kept, but at the moment the entire drop is 2 basses, and I'm most likely going to remove some parts with those basses and replace them with new fills. It's just to make the drop sound more coherent that I'm using only 2 basses, but the whole drop is quote-unquote full instead of just having gaps of silence. Oh boy, this one. Nightmare. Yeah, that's a very fitting title considering the experience I had trying to make this one. So I'm going for something way too hard here. Again, this is not long after I made Chamber, and this is me around Halloween time, I believe, trying to do way too many things at once. So, for one, since this was also still shortly after I'd watched some more music theory videos, I tried to make this a track which changes key a decent amount and uses some weird, like, unconventional composing techniques for dubstep, more conventional in classical music. But if that was all, I could handle it. That wasn't all, though. I also decided that I wanted to try composing in 7/4 time signature. Now, I genuinely think there is merit to making a track in a time signature other than 4/4, and I don't think it's necessarily all that hard. However, it's certainly harder, and it certainly made things a little bit difficult when I tried to do that at the same time as changing key a whole bunch in what's supposed to be a dubstep track. But then the part where this really started falling apart is the fact it's called Nightmare. You see, it's called that because I had seen a track on Disciple called Bad Dreams, which I didn't think was a bad track, but I was a little bit disappointed because the intro I felt nailed the mood of like a bad dream and it felt really atmospheric. But then the drop, while it wasn't a bad drop in the traditional sense, I feel really didn't do the idea of like a nightmare dubstep drop justice. I felt like you could do something way more creative with it and way more fitting and atmospheric, and I wanted to try that. And even just doing that without the different scale changing and weird time signature would have been difficult, I feel, to do justice for. And I don't know why I gave myself an extra challenge by trying to do those two other things at the same time. In the end, what I think I have here is a bunch of interesting ideas that come together to just make a mess. As much as I would love to make this work, I feel like this is not worth the effort. This one I'm very likely to scrap. Maybe some of these basses will be reused. I especially love the kind of watery bass that you're going to hear in the drop and the intro bass. And this intro idea I have for the very beginning of the track is really nice. But there's too many other things here that are just questionable. This is more of a bass experiment than a track, but this project is just called Oh. That's because that's the sound this bass makes. Essentially, this is me experimenting with some really extreme frequency shifting, which causes some weird harmony relationship, like frequency relationships and harmonies and stuff like that. It's hard to describe, but you'll know what I mean when you hear it. Again, this is not something I would make a full track, but it is something where I might at some point take the bass inside this project and put it into another track if I think of somewhere where it would fit really nicely. This is another unnamed project that I have. Well, I say unnamed. I do have a temporary name. Kick clap. That's because essentially the only idea I had going into this was that I'd heard people complaining about the whole rhythm kick clap pattern and all that. And I was thinking, yeah, I've never used that pattern. But then I did have a moment where I was thinking, well, actually, a lot of my drums, I feel, don't sound as powerful as they possibly could do. And a lot of these kick clap sort of rhythm tracks, even if it is generic, do sound really powerful. And I've noticed looking back at my really old tracks that consistently most of my problems are caused by me thinking something needs to be more complicated than it does, just for the sake of making it different. And I really hate to say that because I don't like to be that, oh, just make it simple and boring, but like, sometimes it needs to be done. And I was really starting to think, even though people complain about how generic kick-clap patterns are, a lot of people really like tracks with kick-clap patterns, and they really do hit quite hard. So essentially, at first, I wasn't even going to make a bass here. I was just going to make the biggest, just the most huge kick-clap pattern I could make to try and get a little bit better at percussion. But then I thought, well, this isn't going to sound right unless I put at least some bass with it. So I decided to make what was supposed to be a placeholder bass, just a simple Citrus FM bass. But then I did what I do and accidentally put way more attention to detail into it than I meant to. The concept is still really simple. It really is just a Citrus FM bass, but, you know, I've done a lot of fine-tuning to make it sound really aggressive and really, like, big and huge. And even though it's very generic rhythm, I have to admit, I weirdly do enjoy this. I feel like it is very successful in just being big and hard-hitting. The only thing is, of course, I'm now kind of conflicted because I fully believe this is super generic and boring in concept. But it does sound good. So because it's so uninspired, a lot of the time I don't feel like working on it that much, and like I sometimes think, should I even make this a full track? But then it doesn't feel like it makes sense to not use this for something. And that being said, the pitch shifted part is kind of unique, and it does sound really nice in my opinion. This one's just a bonus, not much to say, it's a Saw FM bass. This track Ethereal until recently seemed like the track I was most likely to actually work on next. It started around with me just messing with a Rhodes piano, but then I managed to do some interesting mixing on it that made it sound very, very different in a very cool and atmospheric way. It felt very chill and also sort of ethereal, and I thought that was a good name for a track, because if you haven't gathered yet, I love just the idea in general of dubstep tracks themed around super kind of trippy, otherworldly stuff. And I felt like I should do some sort of call and response thing here with the main melody, and conveniently my friend Snare had recently finished making a sample pack of drums that, well, fit the bill perfectly. Especially because I was already thinking some kind of drum kit sort of fill here. Now although some of these parts sound rough, in general I do like just about everything I have here. So why haven't I worked on this more? Well, I feel like I've kind of cornered myself in a melodic sense. I don't know, this progression is just really weird, and when I tried to build the chords that would fit the melody, they came out really strange and just difficult to work with. And just in general, in terms of a conceptual sense, I'm not sure where I go from here. Like, I know I want to have a drop, but I don't know how I'm going to get the track to a point where it naturally feels like it should drop. So yeah, I ended up feeling a bit confused as to what I even wanted to do with this one, and slowly sort of went off of it. Here's another quick bonus one that's very weird. Okay, you know I love Fruity Granulizer, and I made this thing with it somehow with like a glass breaking sound effect, and like it's really weird, and I don't know whether I should use it or not. Like I feel like it kind of sounds bad, but it also sounds so unique and like unlike anything I've heard that like I feel like I need to keep it, and I just need to figure out how to use it and it'll be good. I don't know, maybe I'll pitch map it at some point and see how it sounds. Oh boy, this one. This project doesn't have a name, but for now I'm just calling it Pitch Shifting Mess. And it's the perfect example with everything wrong with me when I've tried to make music. Because honestly, individually, just about each little thing I've made for this track is absolutely fine. But they don't mix at all. And it's so painful because I want them to mix because I don't want to get rid of any of this stuff, but they do not mix at all, and I don't have any ideas of how to combine them together. The intro melody is nice, but it doesn't fit at all with the drop I have. And you can see I didn't even bother trying to make it transition, it just kind of decides, oh, I'm dropping now in the middle of the melody and cuts it off. But this started out as me just experimenting. The first thing that was made in this project was the pre-drop saw bass. And that weird pre-drop, like, trippy sound is actually just a saw being, like, pitched, shifted, swapping between up 7 semitones and down 5 semitones, I think it is. Essentially, 7 semitones up from your root note is its 5th, which is the note that harmonizes the most perfectly with it. And so, basically, in theory, I realized that usually when I use pitch shifter, I always use down by 12 multiples of 12 or up by multiples of 12, as in a whole octave up or down. And the reason for that is because I mess with the pitch of it and could knock it out of the correct scale if I use any other values. But it does feel weird using a pitch shifter only to shift by octaves when you have the option to not do that. And I realized that I could get away with a little bit of pitches outside the scale if every single time, even if it wasn't necessarily fitting within the scale that I was playing, those pitches that didn't fit were exactly 1.5 times the pitch of the notes that I was playing at that moment, because they would still harmonize well. The only way that could not work is if you were playing a chord with multiple notes at the same time. But if you're just playing individual notes, even if you end up hitting frequencies outside the scale by moving by pitch amounts, semitones amounts that don't fit into multiples of 12, I could still get something that harmonizes very well, and as a result, also get a very different sort of sound. And like, this part was really successful, it does sound really good, but then just like, everything else here doesn't mix at all with it. And I just very quickly got discouraged and thought, okay, never mind, throw this away. This was just me messing around with FLStudio and accidentally getting something really good. I don't officially have a name for this at the moment, but because I had to name it something when I recorded it, I named the video file 8-bit anime IDK. I don't know, personally to me this sounds sort of anime-like, this theme, but other people I've shown said they don't think so, so I don't know. But even though this is really just a build-up, I think this is a very effective sounding building kind of melody. The only problem is that once it does all get built up and ready to go, there's so much repetition going on that I don't know how I could make it into a full track that doesn't repeat too much and get too boring, while still having it sound like it fits with what came before it. Certainly doable, but I don't have any ideas for now, and this wasn't even something I meant to make, it just sort of happened, so in the trash you go! This one. Some of you might be excited, to see this one. I used to do a lot more remixes, and honestly, I'm not exactly opposed to doing more. The only thing is that usually they aren't my top priority, and especially since I've tried to get better with each thing I upload, and now I'm trying to get to quite a high standard of quality, there's a lot more things I just have to push aside, and almost always remix ideas are one of the first things that go. Trust me, there's a million things that I would like to remix. It's just whether I should spend the time trying to remix them is the issue. But the 11th Hour from Oneshot is such a iconic, godlike track that I just felt like, come on, I have to do that. You could probably guess I'm a Oneshot fan, judging by the background. And I mean, I tried to not make it obvious, but even really, me. I kind of look a little bit like Nico.
Look at this dude.
The only thing is that this track is so far from dubstep in its original form that while turning it into dubstep has a lot of potential for interesting sound design, and it's likely going to turn out as something very different from your typical dubstep affair in a good way, that also means, again, it's a lot of work. These melodies and chord progressions do not lend themselves well to dubstep easily. And as well as that, just generally, although I feel like these two things could combine well if I put in the effort, I'm having a very rare issue of just having no idea of what basses to even make. Not even just the basses, just the general synth, like I don't know what I want everything to be. Whenever I make these remixes, I start out by just putting all the notes in on FL keys and then change it to new instruments as I go. But this has been the one time where weirdly just OTT'd FL keys is what sounds like it fits the most to me. But obviously I'm not just gonna lazily dump a remix of this track that's just all the notes but played on an OTT FL keys. So yeah, you can pretty obviously tell that this is very unfinished past the first sort of third. Yeah, at least the intro came out nice. You could probably tell there was a filtered version of My Burden Is Light playing, fading in, as there was also a kind of slowed down version of the dream music. I actually didn't plan to slow it down, but it turns out it's in 3/4 time, and obviously this track is in 4/4, so I had to slow down the speed of it so that it's synced up with the rest of the track. The drums are quite nice here, but I think they're too aggressive, but then I don't know if I could make them sound this good without making them this aggressive. Overall, this is definitely one I would like to stick with, but it just seems like, again, it's going to be a lot of work, and I'm not sure if I have the time, and again, because it's a remix, it's hard to make this my top priority. I don't know, if a lot of you have a lot of interest in this track in particular getting finished, I could try focusing on it, but otherwise, I might just leave it for now. Well, that's all of them I'm going to show for now, but I will give you a bit of a treat, considering that I've been messing up my upload schedule. I do have a track now that I'm pretty confident is going to be my next full-length track. I've made a decent amount of progress with it, and what I have so far sounds really good. I don't feel like there's really any problems with this. The only thing is that it needs more. So I'm gonna work on making more if I get the time. I was debating showing much of this track, but honestly, considering how long the wait is, even though it might kill a bit of the hype when the track is fully released, I still feel like I don't mind showing you everything I've done so far for it, which I'd say I'm probably just over halfway done with it. When I made this track, it was called Winter, and essentially I was planning to get this out before, the end of winter. That's not happening anymore. I don't know if I'm still gonna call it Winter or not. But quite simply, I can't remember if I've mentioned this publicly before, but I am planning on mostly pivoting to color bass. Just quite honestly, I feel like color bass is just the best genre out there. I love dubstep, but at the same time, I feel like just fundamentally the main problem with dubstep is that it isn't very melodic. And what is color bass but just melodic dubstep? But no, not like that. A lot of what is labeled as melodic dubstep, while still very nice, it often sacrifices the complexity of dubstep to make that melodic sort of coherence. Whereas it seems like a lot of color bass has equally complex basses that are just so finely tuned that they sound all harmonic. And that's always been what I've wanted to go for, but the only reason why I haven't made more tracks like that before is that it's of course an extremely difficult balance to maintain. Simply put, I wasn't good enough, and the only plugins that were really able to do it with some success were Vocodex and this new pitch map that I found now, and both of those things were things that I definitely wouldn't be able to run on my laptop. If I use more than 2 Vocodexes in a single project back on my old laptop, that would kill it. Now that I have my PC though, and now that again I'm trying to get better and better at this, I feel like I am capable of it. It's just going to take a lot of effort. I've done it in the past, of course. I did it with Synesthesia. That was the first thing I made on my new PC. Only Synesthesia took an absolutely enormous amount of effort for me to get done. And the one thing that still bothers me a little bit about it, although it's also, depending on your perspective, a good thing about it, is that it still has this pretty harsh, pretty loud, distorted kind of mastering to it. And that's just how I've always made tracks. And I didn't really notice that it had this at first because comparatively, when I looked at it compared to some of my other older tracks, it is less like that. But there's still an element of distortedness to it, which doesn't just make it more exciting and loud necessarily, because it also makes it feel a little bit more flat when all the volumes are just generally a bit closer to each other. Not quite as much pops because it's all a bit crushed together. It's not much of a problem on that track. It's way less of a problem than it used to be for me, but it's still there. And essentially, I didn't have much in mind going into this track. I essentially just thought, I want to make a color-based track. I'm not going to be that ambitious this time, although things ended up kind of getting ambitious a little bit. But I went in planning to not be too ambitious this time, and essentially, I just needed to focus on my biggest weakness, making it clean. And I feel like I'm most of the way there. I think this is coming out pretty nice. I hope you enjoy it. Well, that's all I've got to show you for now. I hope you enjoyed it. As for the future of this channel's upload schedule, I'm gonna try to stick to monthly for a little bit longer. I'm gonna try and hold out and see if I can manage it. But at this point, I think it's most sensible that I say no promises and that I might just have to leave it. Especially because, to be fair, at the moment I don't have that many people watching me, at least not on this channel. I'm starting to think it might be more sensible for me to just leave this and not worry about this until I have a lot more free time and I'm prepared with a lot more content. I feel like if I end up not being able to keep up with monthly, I should just stop for a bit and make sure that when I come back, I already have multiple months of videos, like, ready. But again, we'll see if I can maintain monthly uploads for a little bit longer. If I can make it to the summer holidays, then I think that I should be able to manage uploads throughout the summer holidays. Thank you for sticking with me through this. And don't forget to join the Discord if you want to talk to me directly or just generally talk about music production. I'll see you in the next one.